Hi, in this video I want to talk about this idea of control, the circumstances, and how circumstances are the things that are controlling us, and it's not us, it's not the internal mechanism. The internal mechanism is just the driving force that makes it possible based on the mechanism that it created us to begin with, the mechanism of crude forces controlling precious commodities based off of the conditions of the first cause creating everything and causing everything to move, and we're obviously living and how we're living in the constant effect after the initial cause, and we're just chaos and forms. Obviously, I've gone over this subject before, and it's the idea where we're bouncing off of each other, and we're based off of our circumstances, which creates who we are, and it's the mechanism, obviously, like our biology and the circumstances and all these social mechanisms that we're a part of, and the reality that we're living in, and all sorts of things, memes, trends, every culture, everything that's controlling us is just a part of the condition of all these different pieces controlling and bouncing off of each other. And I want to talk about how this idea of how these circumstances create who we are, and the driving force is all just this movement, that all these things bouncing against each other, and how that's just the driving force, how that's obviously just the circumstances that are the sort of floating in the existence that we're living in as we we move in and we move through this reality that we're living in. And so we're living in a reality where the circumstances are controlling us, that the circumstances are the things that who we are. We're controlled by the circumstances. We are the circumstances. Based on the circumstances of your existence, something can happen based off of where you are, where you're from, doing this, where you're living, and how everything's happened to you, everything leading up to what happened to you, how you exist, when you exist, all sorts of things can come into effect when understanding how the idea of how these circumstances are the thing that's controlling you as opposed to you controlling you. And I think that's obviously something that most people can understand when it comes to cause and effect, and how all these circumstances are controlling you no matter what. And we know that obviously something has an effect on us. Obviously we recognize that we're living through all the constant of this constant movement, this constant effect. Obviously we always react to effects. We're obviously experiencing non-stop recognition of, obviously I can do this, I'm making choices, having expectations, thinking about, anticipating things, and doing all sorts of things like that, and having some kind of projection onto what you can expect from the future, and what you've looked back in the past, and you can look back and see how you can project sort of what you've experienced on that, and understand that obviously everything that's led up to you now is based on a cause and effect and the circumstances surrounding you. And obviously we're based off the circumstances, and it's based off of all these different things bouncing off of each other. I do this, then it causes another person to do that, or the inaction of me doing something where it's not having much of an effect, even if obviously everything's having an effect. I wouldn't say there's anything called an effect. Obviously through inaction of saying, from our point of view, inaction of not going to save a person who's falling over a cliff as opposed to doing something. You're doing something no matter what. Sort of like you're not doing nothing when obviously something's existing. You can't do nothing, you can only do something, and doing, not moving and not doing something, taking action, ready action, at least from our perspective and understanding that we're taking initiative and doing something doesn't mean that there's nothing. It just means that we're not the nothing from our perspective is still doing something. Obviously, because doing something is doing anything in the reality that we live in, at least talking semantically speaking. Obviously, it's something that we're doing, and we're part of the reality. And obviously, anything that's happening is doing something, and it's a matter of just coming down to understanding the words properly. So, yes, we're controlled by our circumstances. There's nothing more, nothing less. Obviously, this chaotic mechanism of pieces and things bouncing against each other. From our point of view, obviously, it's not chaotic from a point of view of the first cause that created all this chaotic movement, moving and bouncing off of each other. And the circumstances that are creating this are based off this constant movement, this mechanism. Obviously, things that led up, say, to your existence, things that led up to your birth, things that are leading up to every single decision you make, every single thing that happens to you is based off of these conditions that have existed in this reality, and that lead up to you, to your existence, say your birth, and then that has an effect on everyone else, and your birth, and then it causes this and that, but your birth isn't isn't a cause or effect of anything. It's just a movement based on this chaotic mechanism. It's one of the pieces of the puzzle of things constantly bouncing off of each other. Obviously, has an effect, and from our point of view, we can anticipate effects and understand effects to a certain extent. We have to also understand that it has an equal and opposite. Looking back into the past, how all back into the past, how all this stuff has just as much. You have to understand the previous circumstances that have led up to this constant chain of constant cause and effect, and how they're all interlined like a spider web, and it's the one thing crossing over another, over another, over another. Everything almost in a way crosses over everything. We can't isolate ourselves. We're on an island. We're obviously interacting with people. It's a closed environment. We can't go out and interacting with other people. Obviously, even if we are in an island and we're by ourselves, the forces that be, the crude forces that of existence, are still having an effect, and the effect only matters when a sentient being is there to experience this effect, because all these other forces are irrelevant if no one else is experiencing them, no one else is put in harm's way or anything like that, or experiencing some kind of feeling or some kind of sensation, and usually, obviously, the negative or the relieving of negative sensations. So you can't look at a single circumstance and say it's necessarily an effect. It's usually, or a cause, because it's an effect of a previous a cause, and so forth and so on. And you're just along with the string and the movement that keeps on happening over and over again, and it just keeps moving in this in a very fleeting nature, or this constant movement that moves from one thing to another. It's just and obviously that's a way of describing it. It's just movement. It's constant. Obviously, cause and effect is a way of describing this movement, but all we're doing is moving, and things are obviously having an effect, and this and that and the other thing. But since everything's having an effect on everything to a equal and opposite degree, and obviously something's having an effect, it's just existence moving in conjuncture to the reality and things interacting with each other. And this cause and effect thing is in a way simplifying the understanding. It's more of a perspective thing, obviously from our point of view, but it's just movement and this things bouncing off of each other and things interacting with each other, as opposed to some kind of cause and effect, because the initial cause is the only relevant cause when considering this cause and effect, and we're just the constant movement of effect happening afterwards of the initial cause, which is leading to some kind of predetermined end. So it doesn't matter. Our circumstances obviously our reality. This whole idea of there's no I, when in reality you're just a circumstance based off of all this other movement that's happening, doing things in relationship to other things. You're going to be obviously subject to this once you exist, because you're going to exist based on reality as a whole. We're one big piece of reality bouncing against each other like cells. And a pool of blood or something like that, or the atoms that make up some kind. We're obviously working in conjunction. Obviously we're not bouncing, but we make up some kind of whole, and we're making up the whole and the movement within something that's obviously has a predetermined, like the beginning. It has a beginning and an end, at least an understanding that something happened. It's going to lead to some kind of end in the end. It's going to lead all these different pieces to work in a certain way, predetermined based off of a single event that happened, based off of some kind of beginning that we can try our best to explain, at least in the circumstances of the situation explaining this kind of subject. So yes, we're just movement. We're just cause and effect is almost a simplification of understanding that we're just movement, interacting and bouncing off of each other. Cause and effect means nothing. It's not relevant. Not even from our point of view. Just using it as an idea that I have a cause on this. I touch this, or I touch this, or I touch a piece of paper, and then obviously it causes it to go down. But obviously it's based off all these other causes and effects and this and that and the other thing. We can understand from a single circumstance. If I press this, this is causing this to happen. But looking at it as an entire point of view, obviously this cause and effect thing, or just the cause and effect that led you up to pushing the piece of paper, putting the dent in the paper, which causes the dent in the paper to have an effect on me, explaining the dent in the paper, and so on and so forth, to explain the cause and effect that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, on a life-to-life basis, on a universal basis, on a reality basis that we exist in. We're just movement and cause and effect, and the circumstances. Obviously, everything that we're capable of is based on the circumstances. Not only just the circumstances, how everything around us affects each other, the relationship of everything around us, but it's also based on everything that this cause and effect, the circumstances. We're part of the system now. We're part of the system that was to be. We're the one-to-one system where everything's obviously going to exist, is existing right now, and things are going to happen a certain way in the future, and whatever exists then is the way it was meant to be. And describing it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Describing everything, understanding something like determinism, doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore. It just means that it's an understanding, and recognizing the world and understanding how the world works doesn't mean that you can't, you automatically write it off. Sort of like you can apply that to the same old thing that you believe. You can just write it off. Whatever philosophy you believe in, whatever, write it off just because you can understand it and how the reality works around you. You can't apply that to everything. You can't just say and deny it just because you understand it when it's something projected, when it's obviously from their point of view, you're a subjective projection onto the world, and understanding have a different point of view, and it's not having a different point of view, especially when you're accusing someone of projecting something, and if you can understand it, it's no longer a point of view, especially when it comes to something like determinism. You can apply that to anything. Sort of like believing in something like like some kind of religion. Just because you know it's true doesn't mean, obviously it's not true, but hypothetically speaking, from a point of view of a religious person understanding the religion, it's obviously something where just because you believe it and you understand it doesn't mean it's not true, even though it's not true from their point of view. Using that as an example, going back and arguing against them, doesn't mean that it's not true. Just because you understand it's true doesn't mean it's not possible now. Understanding all the different things that are said in the Bible or in the Quran or any kind of religious text doesn't mean it's not true. Although the claims made, you can make up any claim. Obviously, it goes back to this whole idea of agnostic. But determinism obviously is something based off not necessarily the example I'm giving them, the deduction of logic and understanding things. And just because you can prove it doesn't mean it's not true. Obviously, this is something that can be proven based off the facts and the things around us, based on the circumstances, understanding this reality, understanding how things move and work. There's no other way. The mechanism can't work any other way. And just because you don't want to understand it, doesn't mean it's not true. It's something that exists. You can understand it. Based on a simplistic concept of cause and effect, you can understand it means something. Then it's something that exists in this reality. And even though I would say that cause and effect is something that doesn't exist in this reality, it's just a projection of understanding of the movement of these events. Obviously, cause and effect, it can't be applied to everything going on around us. It's just movement, things interacting, this causing this, I'm doing this, I pick up a pin, I pick up something else, I do this, I do that. It's obviously based off of some kind of movement leading up to where I am now. I do this, it leads me, I drop something, I move on, I interact with something, I react in a certain way, the chemicals in my brain react in a certain way, and the circumstances and the individual objects moving in a conjuncture with something else. Say I interact with a pin, it's just movement. The cause and effect would me, like I pick up the pen, then I drop the pen. Obviously, the pen drops. That has an effect on me, my perception. That's obviously something that's ingrained into my mind now. Even though it's a simplistic, it doesn't matter the circumstance. Even if it's something that's not significant, it's something that means something no matter what, because it has an effect, cause and effect, and blah blah blah. And it's something that has a meaning no matter what, because it's built up out of some previous events, previous movement, previous interactions that have led up to where I am now, and it's going to lead to more actions, and it's eventually going to lead to something that happens in the future, or the constant fleeting in the moment kind of experience where we're experiencing. I'm in the future. I was just looking at the pen. Now I'm not looking at the pen. I'm looking at the pen. Now I'm not looking at the pen. And then it's like, well, I was just looking at the pen. Now I'm not looking at the pen. Now I'm constantly moving. It's like this description of time and understanding the time, and time is movement, and so on and so forth. And I'm just constantly moving. I swipe my hand across something. I open my palm, and then I close my palm, and I do all sorts of things like that. And it's just a fleeting experience. You living in the moment. I can sit here and keep on opening my palm, and obviously it's the same. I've made this example before. Understanding that you can do something over and over again, and you can still live in the moment, obviously, but that moment has gone and passed. The very moment, and based off this movement, based off these interactions, based off of all this constant movement, based off of a singular event that happened, leading to a constant effect, a movement, an interaction, that an interaction of different pieces within a whole piece moving together in conjunction and as a whole. and everything's just sort of interacting on a level, and on a molecular level, on a cellular level. Everything's interacting on some kind of level, cause and effect. All these things, I could get sick on a cellular level, and that can lead to something else. Obviously, it's just another movement. I'm obviously experiencing pain, and obviously it goes back to this precious commodities being controlled by crude forces. Obviously, we're sentient, and sentience wasn't something that was meant to happen. It was based on, obviously, the sentience that we experience, the biology we're experiencing, the driving force based on this biology is something that's part of this reality. But the sentience that we understand by feeling these circumstances and pains and sensations can be described as the precious commodity is sentience and understanding and feeling sensations, be it negative or positive, whatever kind of pain. The potential for positive is created by a negative, and obviously that's something that kind of distorts the game that we're playing, the only game that there is to play. So we're in a game where we're being controlled by crude forces. Say we're crude forces controlling us, but we didn't have a sentience. We were just moving objects, moving automatically. Say like a cell moving, but we were just big cells moving based on the universal. I'm not gonna go into that, but we're obviously just cells moving and interacting with other things, and that's all we're doing is bouncing off of different. We're a ball bouncing against another ball, and it's just a room full of balloons. And some of them are popping, and some of them are rubbing against each other. A room full of balls or anything like that. We're just sort of rubbing against each other, bouncing off. You bounce one ball, you throw the ball in, and then it causes all kinds of other things. Then the initial causes the ball, and things are just going to happen from there based on no outside effect. You throw a ball into a cage, there's a bunch of balloons in there, and whatever happens after you throw the ball in there is what's going to be the movement that sort of just happens based off these different interactions that are beyond our perception are going to happen, and things are going to happen a certain way no matter what. And once we look back at the past, the concept of determinism can only be applied when we're looking and perceiving something as an idea to live by, and looking back in the past and understanding that things were going to happen a certain way, and that's the way they happen. I can look back and say, oh, that's the way it's going to happen, and what's going to happen in the future, and what's going to happen going forward, and things are obviously keep on moving. You keep moving. It's just these basic interactions. Things moving, leading to one thing to another based off of these crude forces that keep on, based on the crude forces, and the crude force is based off of a singular event that happened. I keep making the same point over and over again. I just want to make it clear and understanding this, and I want to flesh this out, and that's what the process I'm trying to get across in this video is, fleshing out my own understanding or explanation, at least in these videos, and trying to describe this kind of thing in a video. And I'm trying my best to cover all points before I end the video. So yes, we're just interactions. Things are going to lead from a beginning to an end, and it's just interactions. Cause and effect in and of itself is an illusion, but from our understanding, things are cause and effect from our point of view, and that's something that we at least can understand, and how our circumstance creates us, our potential, our understanding. But the whole idea of an I and our circumstance, our potential, is almost in a way disconnected from our idea of our sentience, our experience. And obviously we're going to experience based off the circumstances of this constant chaotic movement, at least from our perspective and understanding the reality that we're living in. Our sentience is disconnected from the idea of things, our potential, our understanding, the circumstances, the crude forces that are controlling this, the initial cause and the effects, and this constant movement and interaction that causes these things, and the potential of things, the way things interact, the potential based off social memes and understanding, and how the sentience, this sentient being that's feeling things, how it projects an understanding and feelings, and all these feelings and interactions with other things is in a way, I want to say, disconnected from the sentience, is disconnected from the circumstances that create us, because the circumstances that create us is this crude force of movement, and if we're being subject to it, we're part of the whole piece moving. We're obviously an equal opposite reaction when in everything, in reaction to everything else. It's just constant pieces movement. Things are going to happen, and that's the crude force. Things are just going to bounce back and forth off each other, and the only thing that we can do is sit here and accept it, because we know that we're sentient. We can understand that we're sentient, and we're experiencing these sensations, and all we can do is bounce off of each other, and there's nothing we can do about the circumstances. It's just constantly, in a psychological way, frustrating, recognizing that there's nothing you can do beyond a point. You can only sit there based on your own circumstances. Don't let determinism block your understanding that you can still make a change and difference. But you have to recognize that the frustrating circumstance of reality, and the way that we're obviously just bouncing off of things, and whatever happens to us obviously was going to happen once it has happened, and there's nothing we could do except try to mitigate that pain that we experience, or suffering, or any kind of experience that we have. Because we have to recognize that we're just pieces moving along with other pieces, especially other sentient pieces that can obviously have just as much of an effect and movement and so on and so forth, based off this initial cause that created us to begin with. And we're just going to sit here, and we're being subjected to these crude forces, and there's nothing we can do about it but perceive it and be subject to the victim of these crude forces. And we can, the frustration, the understanding, the pain, the suffering, we can do nothing about that except try our best in our own understanding, moving forward based off previous cause and effect events, to try and mitigate that pain. Let's hope that looking back at it, we don't regret something leading to a point in recognizing that the pain that we're experiencing now wasn't based off some lack of mitigation that happened in the past that we were experiencing, and trying to deal with the problem more. Sort of like gangrene, that you didn't cut off your arm, you let it get worse and worse, and you look back and say, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I? The forces that be controlling this precious commodity, this feeling being that I'm feeling even worse now than before. Why didn't it make me just cut off my arm and get the pain over with, so it didn't spread to my shoulder and my chest? So we have to understand that, and these forces of disconnection between the circumstances that control us and the crude forces that control us and the circumstances that create us. The whole idea of I, there is no I. The crude forces that control us create no I, based off of determinism. The determinism creates no I, but the subjective, or not the subjective, but the sentience isn't something that we can necessarily say there's no I to, because of determinism. We're just a me brain interacting with the world based on crude forces interacting, bouncing off each other. There's no I, but with the I that we can obviously understand is the sentience based on the crude forces that we can't control beyond the crude forces that are controlling us, that are leading up to some kind of the crude forces. I want to try to make my point the best I can. These crude forces that are controlling us, and it's almost a disconnection from this idea of an I. And this I, understanding the crude forces, there's no I, based on the biological mechanism, based on predeterminism, based on our own biology, interacting with a predetermined world, based on the same mechanism controlling our body, but the sentience that we experience and understanding and feeling pain is disconnected from the circumstances that create us to begin with, creating all these past circumstances, creating us to who we are now. And the only thing we could do is be subjected and be the victim of these circumstances, crude forces, the lack of I based on these circumstances, understanding that we're a projecting a beast, we're a biased kind of animal based off of crude forces leading up to one thing or another, being subject to our own biases and own projections, and being obviously, when you have more sentient beings being subject to those things. And the distinction is obviously more when understanding that there's a distinction between this understanding the sentience and the circumstances and the things of potential. Obviously, the no potential, understanding that there's no potential beyond the potential that you have based on a deterministic universe, based on all these different things reacting, and there's nothing you do about it because your circumstances control you more than your understanding, and we're just a projection of understanding the crude forces around us, and the I is, and the experience and the sentience is something that's subject to these crude forces, and there's nothing we can do about it. Okay, I think I explained that good enough. I need to make sure this video is short enough so I can get it in one go. So I appreciate it. Thank you and goodbye. Till next time.